If you haven't seen Inland Empire, you're very likely to have seen an image related to it, one of the greatest awards campaigns ever. Without the money for posters, events and adverts, David Lynch sat on the corner of Hollywood Boulevard, in one hand a cigarette, in the other coffee. On one side was a big banner reading, "For your consideration, Laura Dern," and a big shot of her from the film. On the other, a cow and a sign saying, "Without cheese, we wouldn't have Inland Empire." And there is perhaps the best description and explanation of the film. Cheese Dreams the movie. The film is notably a reaction to ideas and dreams like Lynch had never had before, while his previous film Mulholland Drive was a compilation of ideas that began production once enough had been connected together to create a larger image for a screenplay. Instead of writing for a clear vision, Lynch would just write and shoot scenes as they came to him, with the view that at some point things would combine in his head. Handing the cast new pages of dialogue each day, it was perhaps the one time where, like the cast, he too had no idea where the film was going or what it was about until the day it finally clicked. His frequent editor, Mary Sweeney, produced the film but didn't take on the editing role as there wasn't a proper script to work from. Lynch was the only person who eventually understood what he was going for and how everything should piece together in the vision that was in his head, one spawned from a production where he ate a lot of cheese. The improvisational nature of the production took some by surprise, including one producer who sidled up to Laura Dern one day on set to ask whether a specific request from the writer-director was a joke or not. She simply told him, "You're on a David Lynch movie, dude. Sit back and enjoy the ride." By 4 p.m. that same day, Lynch's requested one-legged woman, monkey and lumberjack were on set. It was Dern who started the ball rolling on the film after she moved house, walked down the street and saw Lynch. The now neighbours hadn't seen each other for a while, and Dern said, "We must work together again sometime." "That would be beautiful," Lynch responded. And not long after that, he worked out a couple of scenes, and Dern agreed to ride the wave of Inland Empire's production with him. Throughout production, Lynch shot entirely with a standard definition handheld Sony camcorder. He explained that it meant that he could work and bring out ideas that came to him in the moment much quicker. He also pointed to the greater control that he had of the image with more options in post-production and what he called room to dream. Although the side of him that was interested in technology said that he thought the film being projected in 35mm after the transfer process brought something new to the image and the film as a whole. He'd experimented with similar cameras for projects that he put online throughout the early 2000s, including one of the most unsettling things he ever made. I don't know how many of you seen Rabbits in its entirety. There are elements of it, a couple of shots from it in the film, and it's just as unsettling. But it's just something that really gets under my skin. It's perhaps the most baffling and terrifying thing David Lynch ever made. And while he would say that The Straight Story was his most experimental film, that may be the case stylistically, but in terms of production, I think that title does go to Inland Empire. As the years after its release went by, Lynch would become more certain in interviews that it was his last film. The industry shifted to more blockbuster-orientated territory where he saw little room or success for the kind of films he wanted to make. There's an element to his final 2 features, Inland Empire and Mulholland Drive, about the dream-crushing nature of the film industry, despite its promises and the ways in which people get caught up in it and its attempted moulds. Yet he still loved it and what it could produce, alongside Hollywood and Los Angeles as places. And as he would simply put it, Inland Empire is a film, as the tagline says, about a woman in trouble. Between fiction and reality on the set of a cursed film production for the first hour, and then we enter the second hour and everything becomes very Lynchian indeed. He would say to the Los Angeles Times in 1989, "I don't know why people expect art to make sense when they accept the fact that life doesn't make sense." He'd say elsewhere, "I always say this, a film is sort of like a book, and books get written and the author maybe passes away. So you can't go talk to them and say, 'What did you mean?' People have a right to analyse a thing and say what it is for them and to criticise it in one way or another, and it's beautiful. But I really believe the film should stand on its own and there should be nothing added, nothing subtracted, and you work a long time to make it just so. And it's a very precious thing, every film. So that's sort of the way it is." Before this screening tonight, Fellini's 8.5 was shown as a film that inspired both Inland Empire and Lynch in general. Alongside Kubrick, Fellini was one of the filmmakers Lynch admired most, citing the way that he could communicate an emotion without showing anything in a direct manner, without ever explaining anything, just by a sort of sheer magic. And I think that's something that he managed to do throughout his own career. He's one of the few directors who the term visionary truly correctly applies to. On the set of 8½, Fellini apparently put a piece of paper near the camera that simply said to his actors, "Remember that this is a comic film." And I'd be interested to know how funny Lynch found some of his own films. I'm not saying that he saw them as out-and-out comedies. There's something I've heard a couple of times over the years, that Kubrick made each of his films as comedies, or that's what he viewed them as when making them. And I don't think Lynch saw the same for his own, but I do wonder how much humour he saw in them. However veiled or tinted it might have been, from that same LA Times interview he said, "Absurdity is what I like most in life, and there's a humour in struggling in ignorance. If you saw a man repeatedly running into a wall until he was a bloody pulp, after a while it would make you laugh because it becomes absurd. But I don't just find humour in unhappiness. I find it extremely heroic the way people forge on despite the despair they often feel." And that comes back to the consistent point that I've mentioned a number of times in the introductions for these films over the course of this season, that David Lynch loved people, and the ways in which their minds worked, the ideas that they, alongside the places in which they lived, created and could create, made. In turn, whether in film, TV, sculptures or paintings, he'd allow himself to be led by them, finding joy in the chase, often describing it as a beautiful thing. That's, alongside ideas, one of the words that's come up so many times in interviews that I've seen and read from him. Beautiful. He loved to see beauty in the world and in ideas and people. Inland Empire is the product of a film formed idea by idea. It's certainly not my favourite Lynch film, but I do think it's the film where so much of what made him and his ideas comes together, finding the bigger picture along the way, even if David Lynch was the only person who ever truly understood the heart of it, or at least what he may have intended. There's an expression, "The world is as you are." So when things get a hair more abstract, you get a lot of different interpretations. And so if you see it that way too, totally beautiful. After Lynch said that towards the end of a Q&A for Inland Empire, an audience member shouted, "What's next?" The response, "What's next? I'm going to go home and try to catch ideas." He may not have made another feature film, but he continued to pursue ideas, whether in a return to Twin Peaks, weekly weather reports online, or a short film where he interrogates a monkey. That short film really brings home Mel Brooks's nickname for him, Jimmy Stewart from Mars. David Lynch passed away in January, perhaps moving on to pursue the next idea or dream. One thing's for certain, his work and love of humanity has transported and inspired countless others in their own ideas and dreams. And I do genuinely believe that so much of what he loved in film, people, and creating can be found in his final feature. So here we go. 3 hours of pure David Lynch, Inland Empire.